Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Watching in the Basement. I am Franklin.
Tristan Rainwater.
Mercy.
And y'all watching Watchers in the Basement. We covered Yellowstone episode 7 earlier this week, but now we are covering a new Yellowstone spin-off series called 1923. It stars Harrison Ford, Helen Mirren. Like the acting elk in this show is elite, say the less. This takes place about 40 years after 1883. So it's a bunch of new cast of characters, um, and a whole new storyline on the precipice of the Great Depression in Montana. And we're gonna cover episode 1 today. Tristan, what was your thoughts with episode 1 of 1923?
Uh, for a pilot episode, I think we got enough. mm, we got some background and context. I thought they kind of left some things out, like some of the characters, as far as like their backstory, who they are, so we can kind of connect some things. But ultimately, I think the show did a really good job kind of setting the location. Like obviously we know that we're in Montana. We see like the big sky, the big mountain ranges and all those things. We still get those shots, which connect us to Yellowstone. But seeing, what the main town is looking like, Main Street, I guess, seeing the horse and buggies with the cars, and just so if you watch 1883 or a significant portion of 1883, you should kind of see the progression of America and innovation and all those things through those shots. Um, Overall, as a pilot, I liked it. I didn't think it was as good as the 1883 pilot for different reasons, but it was good. Like introduced us. Anytime we just get introduced to more Duttons, like that's always a good thing. So I give it a solid for a pilot. I give it a solid 7 out of 10.
Marcy, what about you?
It was a pretty solid pilot. It was good to kind of already have like some backstory or some knowledge of who some of these characters are and who they will be and how they're related to the Duttons, excuse me, that we know in present day. Acting was really good. It was hard for me to watch. There was a lot of violence. It was a little bit different than what we've seen in 1883 and in Yellowstone. I think it was just like that violence against women and indigenous women that was just a little bit hard for me to see. But yeah, I think it was a pretty good pilot that has me hooked onto like wanting to know more of the story and what happens next.
I agree. I gave it a 7. I think 1883 Taylor set a high bar for these spin-off pilots, and it's more of the same, man. Like it seems like this Dutton family is just cursed. And with everything that's going on from 1883 with the trek out west, the western frontier, to now in 1923 with the the World War I war going on, and the Great Depression. It's showing that how the Duns were affected by all of this, um and it's interesting to see that the bloodline is more of the same. Brash, sometimes arrogant, brave, and oftentimes their temper gets the best of them. Um, but I mean, I love it. I think it has the potential to be a great show, especially with the acting and the actors they have on the show. Um, but let's talk about the opening scene. And the opening scene really caught my attention because the opening scene personifies what a Dutton is and who a Dutton is. So Kara Dutton, who is Jacob's wife, is on her ranch and she's chasing down this poacher. Apparently, that's on their land. I don't know if they're trying to steal cattle or steal livestock of some sort, but she has to be in her 70s at this point, chasing them with a shotgun. And this guy who he's trying to plead to Kara to not end him, and if you kill me, you won't be right with God and all of this. So, Marcy, what was your thought with the opening scene of this series?
I thought it was a really great opening scene. Again, it really sets the stage to these are the Duttons, and I think, like Elsa has said, like violence has always kind of like haunted them and been a part of their life and part of their journey. It was just kind of funny to kind of see the guy just kind of pleading for his life and trying to appeal, I guess, to her gentler side as a woman and as a Christian or whatever. And I think he thought that that would help him, but it didn't. So it was a great opener just to like the action that we're about to see. And it was great to see Helen Mirren just kind of kick some ass and be like, yeah, okay, like, yes, I'm a woman, but that doesn't mean I'm not going to protect myself or protect my home and I'm not kind of falling for your shit. So I liked it.
And she seems like the toughest one. Like that accent is straight from Ireland. You know, like see, she hadn't really assimilated into American culture. Like her, you know, accent is still the same. Like she's from old world Ireland. So a lot of those rituals, a lot of this the way of life, like this doesn't seem like much of a like the West, you know, the Mountain West of the United States just doesn't seem like something that she's scared of, right? So like that scene, like you said, it's a perfect encapsulation of like what it means to be a Dutton. Like you have to protect. So we don't know what she was protecting. Um, we knew that that guy, you know, I guess we can kind of make the assumption that maybe he was a sheep herder or something like that because of the accent matches. But he was trying to play on her, I guess, sympathy as a woman. It's like, no, actually, you know nothing about heaven. Like, this is it for you, my boy. Um, so, yeah, what's funny when I was watching the show, when I first watched it, my first watch, it picked up like, I guess, like in the middle of that scene. So I was thinking like maybe it was like the last scene of the episode and I missed it and I had to rewind or something. But no, this first episode, somebody's somebody getting killed. Like that's the Taylor Sheridan universe that I'm used to. So good opening
Absolutely.
scene.
Absolutely, and like in that very scene, she's about to pull the trigger and she doesn't have a bullet in the chamber, and the guy has a handgun. You would think the guy with the handgun would have the advantage because it's a smaller weapon. He can reload and fire. Nah, not cuz. She does this. She was able to reload the weapon and shoot him point blank range, and I was like, yeah, that is a Dutton.
It's
That is that.
1923, but like all guns still haven't um like innovated to where they are now. So like that revolver, it took some time.
Yeah,
I think it only
you know.
had what two shots in it or something. Like that took some time.
Absolutely. So that's the introduction to Kara Dutton. So we move forward to her husband Jacob Dutton, and this is and just to I guess explain the family tree. Jacob Dutton is James Dutton's brother, who was played by Tim McGraw in 1883. So in the beginning of the episode, Elsa narrates and she talks about how um, Jacob moved to Montana a year after I think his brother James got killed, and a year after Margaret, which was played by Faith Hill, passed away in the freeze, and her two sons survived. So he takes in Jacob and Kara takes in Spencer Dutton, and what's the other kid's name? I'm
John.
John Dutton Senior. Yes.
Yeah.
So they take him in, they raise him as their own. So now Jacob is taking over the ranch. He's now the ranch head, and he's apparently the commissioner now of Bozeman. So the next scene, they're in the town center, and the sheep herders and cattle herders are having issues because the locusts are coming into Montana and they eating up all the grass. So it's hard for sheep and cattle to graze. So we see a character from Game of Thrones, Jerome Flynn, who plays Bronn in Game of Thrones. He plays a guy by Mr. His name is Mr. Creighton. I believe it's Banner Creighton, if I remember correctly. And he plays a Irish sheep herder, and he's upset that the locusts have ate all of his grass, and he's moving his herd to other parts of like private leased land to other people. And John, who is a commissioner, says, "Man, you can't do that, man. Like, if you gotta move your sheep herder up north to the mountains, then do that. And Banner's like, well, if I do that, the bears are going to eat them. The wolves are going to get them. So what can I do? And a fight breaks out. The sheriff, stops it. They go outside, and more drama ensues. Banner puts his hand on Jacob. Jacob's like, nah, fam. Like, and it's like 12 on 4. Jacob has 4 men, but he don't give a damn. Again, another introduction to a Dutton. uh, Marcy, what was your thoughts on that conflict between Banner and Jacob?
Um, it was interesting, and I'm just saying because I only watched the show like one time, so I don't have a lot of insight. I typically try to watch the Yellowstone episodes twice, but again, this one was a little bit hard for me. But I liked that we're seeing like those kinds of conflicts, right? That's the types of conflicts that I wish we saw a little bit more of in Yellowstone, not so much of like the scheming and conniving and like big corporations, but again, like what you actually have to deal with on the ranch to survive. And so I liked like this problem. Obviously, it's not going to be like a modern problem. So I liked just seeing a problem that people back then dealt with and just kind of see how they deal with it here in this episode. It's probably going to be obviously more dramatized, like they probably would have handled it in real life. But I grew up watching like Little House on the Prairie, so not the same type of show, but again, same types of problems when you're on the farm and you're ranching, and like these are the real life problems that they dealt with. So I liked kind of seeing that since I really don't have any experience in that being from modern day Dallas.
T.
Um, yeah, I mean, I we should like in each of these shows we review, like just kind of stop and memorialize the Game of Thrones characters that just pop up. We should have did that for Brienne on Wednesday as well. But I just off the top, like this kind of setting like one of the biggest conflicts that we're going to see, which is ranchers versus sheep herders, which is in a way kind of paralleling the land disputes that are happening between the natives, in Yellowstone, that are kind of foreshadowed in 1883. Um, I forgot his name, his actual name. I'm gonna call him Braun for right now. But Jerome Flynn's character, like
Banner Creighton.
Banner, yeah. So they're just arguing about what to do with this excess grass. Like only the Dutton Ranch really has this grass. Everybody is scrambling to try to feed cattle, feed sheep, so on and so forth. And like it's just coming to a head. Like, what do you do when there's no more grass on your land because it's a drought or plagued by locusts? What do you do to like survive? You send them to, you find grass wherever it's at. And, like they take these land leases very seriously. Like this kind of parallels like the fight across the Wild West. Is like you're fighting for property, you're fighting for this territory, and it's only yours. And it's not like this altruistic um just method of sharing land and sharing resources. They haven't developed that yet. And the funny part about that is they haven't really found out how to share resources, and because they can't, it's going to make everybody suffer instead of them banding together to try to fight through this plague and fight through these droughts and stuff together, and it's going to be the death of all of them.
I think it's interesting too, and I think over the next couple episodes they'll explain how the war will affect the U.S. at this time. The war was on the brink of bankruptcy in the early 20s, and finally it did in the late 20s with the Great Depression. But I like how you see remnants of World War One in the episode, and they mention the war a couple of times. And oftentimes, especially back then, when war happens in other countries and they have to send men and supplies and money to fund these wars, it often affects people in the U.S., especially people in farms, people in more rural areas, as much because when grown men leave those areas, like grown men ranchers and cowboys and things of that nature, they go to war. Who's there to do the work? Who's there to make sure that the upkeep of the ranches and farms are astute? And so I think I would love to see how they explain that in the show, of how that the war affected everything in Montana and the rest of the country as well. Um, so when Jacob gets back to his livestock commission group, they say, well, the best thing to do is everybody who has cattle on all the ranches to move south for greener pastures. This is often dangerous because a lot of these people have a lot of cows and a lot of cattle. So if you don't have enough grass along the way, your cattle could die. And there was a scene of like a lot of dead cattle. Jacob's overlooking the pasture, and he's seeing that the cattle are already perishing. So the issue's already loomed large, and it's just started. Um, so another Dutton we see, Spencer Dutton, which is James's Tim McGraw's son in 1883. He wasn't in that show. He wasn't born yet, but he looks like he's like a hunter or a poacher in Africa who like gets hired to like track down beasts that are affecting people's land and people's way of living in Africa. So he's hired. He's there tracking a lion apparently with his two African hunter buddies, and he tracks his lion. He kills his lion, and and that's pretty much it for that scene. So we don't get much context of why he's there, at least not at that point. But what was Marcy? What was your thoughts on meeting Spencer Dunham for the first time?
Yeah, I think he's going to be an interesting character if he sticks around. I think we still don't know based on the end of this episode. But he's going to be, I think, a really interesting character because he's dealing with shell shock and PTSD from his time in the war. And then we kind of get this from Kara's letter to him that it seems he is in Africa to kind of get away. She doesn't know like why he's away and he won't come home. I think that's left for us to speculate. Maybe was there some kind of falling out with the family, or is it just kind of like the trauma and the after effects of the war where he kind of feels like he has to go and do all of these other things in Africa that are like super dangerous, kind of deal with like all of his feelings and his PTSD that he's dealing with. So I really like the scene where he met the English woman. And then we know what happened with her. That was kind of a gnarly scene. But I think if he sticks around, he's going to be an interesting character to watch and just see how he develops and how that shell shock kind of affects him moving forward.
Actually, watching that scene now where Pretty Little White Woman, man. Sorry. Scene is popping up right now as we speak. Um, yeah, I'm just interested to know more about Spencer Dutton. You know, obviously the PTSD from the war takes him away from home, sends him all the way to Africa. You know, of all places. But he seems like an interesting character. Like he seems like he um, has a way with the natives to where they feel comfortable with him. It doesn't look like he's goddamn the white woman. She ain't stand a chance, man. That's crazy. But it seems
Focus,
like
bro. Focus.
you say what?
Say focus, bro.
Yeah, it's a little pretty woman, man. It's crazy. But it doesn't seem like he's just taking advantage of them or trying to steal resources. Like I don't know if we have enough information to label him as like a poacher. It doesn't look like he's gaining anything from killing these animals. It looks like he's just hunting animals that are hunting other people. So we do see some level of altruism from him. So I'm just interested in just seeing more about him. You know, we see the flashback from the war, and just seeing like the different things that he dealt with there, and like obviously that's going to cause some trauma. But just seeing like how does he feel about his family? How does he feel about being on the ranch? And hopefully we get to see him get back to the ranch. Well, I think we will, but
Yeah.
obviously through Elsa Dutton's narration, like they want us to think that, or want us to like kind of decide which one of those remaining kids from James and Margaret are going to make it. So we'll see.
I find it interesting too because so with him being a hunter, he has to find a way to make money, right? Like I'm sure he's getting paid to knock out these animals. And again, it goes back to the environmental conflict of like killing animals in their habitat. Humans taking over the plains, taking over the Serengeti, taking over, places where these animals actually live at, and I think Taylor does a good job with the racial conflict and like the environmental conflict of kind of like smooth things over and like making it cool to like focus on the character itself. But as a the son of an African immigrant, I watched that scene. I was like, white people taking over these lands. White people setting up camp in the middle of the jungle. Who gives you the right to shoot these animals off their habitat? Like that's crazy to me. But he has to be making money off of this because he's traveling all throughout Africa. I'm sure he's not doing this from a pro bono aspect. I'm sure he's getting paid for this, but no, I would love to see where this goes with him because later on in the show, Kara writes a letter to him, and she's like worried that they've drawn him away or the war has affected him in some sort of pattern, and he just wanted to come home. So it makes me wonder how long he's been gone because I know the World War One ended probably like 1920 or late 1919 or whatever. So he's probably gone for a while. So I like to see um, the relationship between Kara and her nephew and see where that goes for sure. So we meet another Dutton, Jack Dutton, which is James Dutton Senior's son. James grandson from 1883. So it makes me wonder. It makes me wonder. So in that scene, they finally decide to go south with their cattle. So they go south and Jack's engaged to be married. He's betrothed to a young lady by the name of Elizabeth. Um, but it makes me wonder as well. Uh, Elizabeth doesn't know the way of living for these ranchers and cowboys. So she's newly engaged to Jack. They have to move this cattle down south. It'll take a week or two, and they're supposed to be married within a week. So Jack, who's young and doesn't really know how you know talk to women at this point of his life, tells his uncle, "Oh, it'll be fine. I'll tell her this is what it is. Like she'll have to deal with it." So he tells Elizabeth that we have to push the wedding back a week or two. She's not happy about it, of course, and his approach was very very rough. And how he told her. It's funny because when I watch that scene, it shows me that even though he's young, I don't see I don't see it any differently if had Jacob had told her. I think Jacob would have told her the same way because they're so entrenched in this cowboy ranching life that it's that over everything per se. So Tristan, what was your thoughts on like Jack talking to Elizabeth and his approach to let her know that the wedding had to be pushed back a couple weeks?
It just shows like a lack of tact. All right, like it was important for them to show that, to let us to understand just how young Jack is, like mentally. Like, yeah, obviously he's a cowboy and fearless and all this stuff, but like the things that you actually need to survive real life outside of the ranch, like those are things he still needs to learn. And I think that scene was important because they were able to juxtapose that with the care and tact of Cara Dutton, who we get to see calm down a very upset bride to be, and also kill a man. Like this, the duality of Cara Dutton. But we see the contrast there. Like as somebody who's lived and understands um, how to engage and interact with people in certain situations, and we see a young man who's lived for the most part a privileged, somewhat privileged life, like relative to other young men his age, um, and this is also kind of teaching us or continuing to teach us about what it means to be a rancher and like the different sacrifices that need to be made. So it's not like, I feel like the show is not just trying to convince Elizabeth that this is just what this way of life is going to lead to and this is a sacrifice you're going to have to make, but it's also a reminder to us as viewers, like, hey, it's not, also, if this happened in 2022, we as viewers we throw a fit. Like, who the fuck postpones a wedding a week or two because X, Y, and Z? Like, no, we set this date. This is just what it's going to be, and we constantly need those reminders. Like, hey, this is not how it is in every single culture, and especially once we start, backtracking through history. 1923, it's just not as big a deal as it would be now to postpone that, especially when you know you're marrying a rancher, you're the daughter of a rancher, you're probably the granddaughter of a rancher. Like, so this is just the way of life, and I appreciated the show using that as a vehicle to just let us know, like, hey, this is what it means to be a cowboy. In case you've gotten so used to like the 21st century way of doing things, this is still early 20th century, and certain things will come before these emotional and social gatherings and rituals that they have and traditions.
Marcy?
Um, yeah, I love what Tristan mentioned about the duality of Helen Mirren's character, Kara, being able to, in the first scene that we see her, just shoot a man and protect herself and not have to think twice about it. And then, she's obviously a very strong woman, but then she was able to kind of tap into a more gentle side of herself to be able to smooth over that situation with Elizabeth and just kind of, again, like very calmly and rationally explain to her, if you love him and if you want to be married to him, this is what the reality is going to be. Like, this is what it has been for me. This is what it has been for pretty much every other rancher's wife. So I think it was just a really beautiful scene, and also just kind of how she talked about it. Um, and just kind of explaining just kind of the sacrifices that you do have to make if you do want to commit, your life to somebody else, especially again in early 20th century. If you're a rancher, like everything has to come before, the ranch and cattle have to come before everything, because that is how you are surviving, right? You're not just trying to do that to make some money. Like, you need to do this to survive. So it was a really nice scene. And I don't know if I'd really seen a lot of the actress that plays Elizabeth before, but she kind of reminded me of a very young Cameron Diaz. So I thought that was good too. But again, Jack definitely needs to maybe learn how to speak with her better and just kind of learn the ins and outs of just being in a relationship. But again, I think he's young, and it's a different era where just people just weren't having deep conversations about relationships and things. It was just like, oh, okay, like this is what's going to have to happen. And that's pretty much it.
We have a comment from Professor 357. He says, the lifestyle is constantly providing and taking from big life events to actual laws and sustenance of life. And I couldn't agree more with that. Thanks, Professor, for chiming in, man. I appreciate you. Good hearing from you. So let's fast forward again to Tiona Rainwater. And I didn't know who this character was until I looked it up. So it looks like a Native American boarding school on the reservation in Montana. And during those days, a lot of the Native Americans in the 1800s, Trailatiers, that era, were all moved, forced out of their homes and put on reservations. In the early 1920s, Native American boarding schools were being built by Caucasians, and they did it to assimilate Native Americans into a white man's world. That's what these schools were for. And there's a scene where Tiana she's being asked a question by sister, can't remember her name, but she asked her a question about, it was a science question about I don't know, sulfate, or I can't remember.
Some soap, whatever.
Yeah, some type of
Sister
soap.
Mary though.
Yeah, Sister Mary. Okay, it asked about the contents of it, and she doesn't remember, or she gives an answer, and every time she gives an answer that Sister Mary's not pleased with, she hits her in the hand, and it gets to a point where she's hitting her repeatedly on the hand, and Tiana just snaps. She rises up from her desk and like throws a haymaker, knocks Sister Mary to the ground, and she's giving her repeated rights to the face, and it fast forward to now her being in the priest Renard office, and she, he recounts what he asked Sister Mary what happened. Sister Mary tells her, says that this child wouldn't answer a question, and she kept getting it wrong when the rest of the class got it right, and she's like, Tiana shows her hands to the priest, and and she says, Sister Mary then says, well, she's a stubborn mule. I had to beat her. That was my only way I can get the answer out. And what appears to be in an altruistic way, Priest Renaud asked her to. It's very uncomfortable to see, but in his mind, he felt like he was doing the right thing. But he asked Sister Mary to put her hands out and recite a verse in Corinthians. and I'm not sure. I'm not sure she got it right or not, but every time she says a word, he gets her hands get beaten and bloody to a pulp to where Tiana, who's the one that got assaulted in the first place, asked for mercy for Sister Mary. What was y'all thoughts? 'Cause that's a I had to pause that scene, and take a walk because it was very tough for me to watch. But Tristan, what was your thoughts on that scene from the point of her getting beat to the point of her going to the priest office in Tiona?
I skipped most of that scene the second watch. Couldn't do it. Again, this pilot episode, especially for period pieces like this, I always want to like drop you into like the scene and drop you into like the location, so you can start to make those connections. And the connection that I think that scene is trying to, the function of that scene is to let us know, again, we're in the 1920s, and there was so many indoctrination. Like we had indoctrination with the Japanese, we had indoctrination like so many different ethnic groups into Americanism. We had Red Scares and all these things that are starting to happen after World War One. And again, this is just kind of drawn in that historical connection between what's happening on the screen and what was happening around that time period in real life. So yeah, it's nothing to see like these indoctrination camps and indoctrination schools. Hell, we still have indoctrination schools like stuff today. But yeah, really tough to watch. I skipped through pretty much on the second watch. I skipped through basically until the ending of that particular scene after when Tiona, am I saying the name right? Tiona. When she's
Yeah.
in the bed in the bunk with one of her friends, and they're just talking about like she's talking about escaping, right? So like we can start foreshadowing what's going to happen with her character going forward. But I'm not here to just watch people in general, especially like younger girls and stuff getting beaten and just sitting there and taking it. Um, Also, I think what happened in the father's office, it's just letting us know like, hey, violence is just a part of how a lot of these institutions run, and they don't really know any other way. And this was really commonplace for that time period. So just overall, that scene was like just kind of making a connection between what's happening in that scene and what in like these historical connections that Taylor Sheridan and the rest of the show want us to make.
Marcy, what were your thoughts?
Yeah, it was definitely really difficult to watch that scene. Just so much violence, obviously. And part of me was like, I don't know if all of this was necessary to show, but then the other part of me is like, well, this is what actually happened. And I think it's important to show that because there are still a lot of people that don't know that this happened or don't want to acknowledge that this happened and this is part of our history. So I kind of felt a little bit torn as to, was it too much to show, or is it just something that people really need to see? But again, it does shed a light on just the very harsh institution of having these residential schools, again, to civilize indigenous communities and children, and just how like terrible they were. They were taking children and young adults from their families, from their tribes, and putting them in these schools. And again, trying to quote unquote like beat the Indian out of them is what they said that like was their goal, to make them civilized. So definitely like terrible part of our history, terrible part of just kind of the church, in my opinion, just growing up Catholic, knowing like the history that the church has had, not only here, but in like many countries throughout the world, when they're saying like, well, we're doing this to like glorify God and to spread God's word and to like convert people and save them. But they're also doing it in a very violent way throughout most of history. And I think it was just really evident when they're in the priest's office, right? Like he, shows quote unquote some mercy to the young girl when he's kind of getting mad at the nun, but then he's kind of perpetuating that violence against her. So we see that the church and kind of just patriarchy and all these institutions, they're not only terrible for the people that they're openly oppressing, like natives in this sense, but also it was terrible for like the nuns, the women, like they are also subject to oppression and to violence under these institutions. So I think that was also important to see that just because you are a nun and you're kind of like adhering to what you think the church wants you to, and imposing like these terrible things to your students, that still isn't going to save you from also being oppressed and, you know, violated against. So definitely very, very tough scenes to watch, and very tough when they did show like her injuries, and the nun is like, you know, we're basically like going to try to stay out of each other's way because we don't want to get in trouble with him. So I think that was, I guess, their type of truce. But yeah, it was a very, very difficult scene to watch. So I definitely do hope that she does get to escape, because it was really sad when she was talking to her friend about, you know, all of these other young girls that were here with us. When they left, they said they would write. Those letters haven't come. Where have they gone? It obviously like hasn't ended up well for them.
And it also showed like how transitive violence is, especially in that setting. So like obviously, Tiona, she lashes out at the nun, at Sister Mary, because of the repeated abuse that she had been getting, and then that abuse was just paralleled by by the priest to the nun. So you like it's just a circular thing. Like one abuses the other, because they're getting abused, they feel like that is the proper way to address any type of insubordination, any type of mistake, so on and so forth. And then abuse just keeps going and keeps going. Um, so after that, what I forgot what happens immediately after that particular scene, but I want to talk about um, what happens after. So after that, we have Emma and Kara. They are waiting for Jacob and the rest to come back, and at night, just kind of waiting. Um, what are some other like big picture themes of this episode that you saw uh, that require some discussion?
I just really like that scene between Jacob and Kara when he has come back. So this might have been before like the scene that we just talked about. But it was really nice to just kind of see like an insight into their relationship. So he comes back, he gets in bed. She's like, "Oh, it's late. You're just now getting in." And then he explains how they have to postpone the wedding. And she's saying, "Well, now I have to go and smooth it over." But it was just like a really great scene because they were able to show that these are characters that have been together and married for a long time. So it was just a nice little glimpse into their relationship. And then, you know, a little bit of some naughty talk in between them, right? Like she was like, "Well, you know, they don't really need to have a big wedding because, you know, after we got married, I'm sure all you wanted to do was just kind of like take me back somewhere and just kind of like, you know, have your way with me." So that was just kind of fun
Bend
to
me over
watch, like
the
a
first
couple.
thing that could hold both of our weight, I think.
Yes. So I think that was just like a really fun scene to just kind of give us a glimpse into their marriage and their relationship. And then again, something else is when Kara and I think it's John's wife, I guess Jack's
Emma.
mother, they're just
Yeah,
kind of waiting
Emma.
for everybody to come
Right.
back. So it just kind of shows like what the women had to go through, right? Like not only did they also have to do like the homesteading and waiting for like their husbands and sons to come back from whatever they were doing. You know, there's kind of like that anticipation of when are they going to come back, that we also saw in Yellowstone a couple weeks ago when Monica's just kind of waiting for them to come back. So I think that was a really neat scene to see. Um,
Yeah, I was just about to bring that up. Like we just like literally 1 week ago, we saw Monica
yeah.
and Summer doing the same thing, just kind of waiting. Um, Man, hearing Helen Mirren talk about getting bent over is just so wild to me.
Yeah.
Like, ma'am, you're a Helen Mirren. Like, come on now, you're a
And it was fun because
pristine.
I think a lot of times we try to like think back in like quote unquote olden days and be like,
Mm.
oh, like everybody was just more proper and like, you know, people didn't talk like that. But no, like people have always, you know, had like these types of relationships with their spouses. And people have always like joked about this, and sex has always been a thing, right? It's not like something that, you know, just happens. Like, not people weren't just more proper back then. People probably like weren't improper like outwardly, but that doesn't mean that everybody was proper. So it was like nice to just for them to insert that, right?
If anything, from everything we've seen and read, like people were more savage back then, like
Yeah.
because there was less decorum, there was less, resources to hide some of these things. Like shit, in 1883, Elsa loses her virginity in the grass, like
Yep.
20 yards away from her parents. Like,
Yeah.
so this is not, yeah, like, so I did appreciate that. One, it also lets us know how strong their relationship is and the things that they've had to deal with up until this point. So I think Jacob said that he'd been in Montana since 1894. So almost 20 years. And from what I've read about the backstory between Jacob and Kara, like they made their, I couldn't find where they came from, but we can assume Tennessee because that's where James was from. But they made their way across West, and they had to go through some shit in the same way that James and Margaret had to go through some shit to get to Montana. Like Jacob and Kara had to do some shit, and a lot of it was Kara. Like so Kara, like we can tell that they bonded not just in the trials and tribulations of just making it through life, but making it out west, taking care of these two kids who are not theirs. They're Jacob's brother's kids in his new place, continuing on the family legacy that James had already started by making his way out to Montana. Like, so their relationship has been forged through so much fire. So I really can't wait, honestly, until this next Sunday, if there is an episode. No, it is not an episode this next Sunday, but till episode 2 and beyond to see like more of the backstory between Jacob and Kara and what they had to go through and how it's affected their relationship. Because, as far as marriages go, like they seem to have like a very strong, very dependent relationship where I think Jacob sees Kara as somewhat of an equal, as much of an equal as a man can see his wife in 1923. So very interested to seeing that relationship and everything that went into it before we get to this point going forward.
It also makes me more proud of their relationship as well, because not only are you moving out west and you don't know anybody outside of your brother and their kids, but you're becoming parents because they have no kids of their own. So you're taking on, essentially 3 kids. I mean, a great nephew, but at the same time, you're taking over 3 kids. You're taking over a ranch that you had no plans of even taking over. And at this time, whenever Jacob got there in 1894 or whatever, he knew nothing about Montana. He knew nothing about probably how to run a ranch that big, and so to now be the main head person over this ranch and learn the laws of that land and to become commissioner at that shows me the amount of determination that Jacob has, and for Kara to hold all of that down, like she understands, like she gets this life, and you get you truly get an understanding of Kara when she's explained to Elizabeth about what this life is. Like this life takes precedence over
Yeah.
your marriage. Like, I think she told Elizabeth at one point, like, if you have a kid in the summer, it'll be a month before your husband gets back to you. You have a kid in the winter, it'll take even longer.
Mhm.
So, the experience that she breathed in that scene really showcases who she is, and really showcases the bond that Jacob and Kara have as a tandem, as a couple. So I'm not sure what you got left off at. Have y'all talked about Spencer taking over that new job with the 2 leopards? Well, I guess 1 leopard at the time.
No. Perfect
No,
time to talk about it now.
yeah, we can end there and talk about that's literally the last scene.
Yeah. So in the last scene, so Spencer takes another job, um, and they don't say where in Africa, but the guy who hired him says that, hey, we have people here in this camp, and there's a leopard And he shows Spencer the leopard print in the ground, and he's like, "Yeah, this thing is the size of a sofa." So they wanted to move camp, but Spencer's like, "No, I need them as bait here, so I can track the leopard." And he meets a nice young lady who fancies him clearly, definitely fancies him, but the guy tells him that yeah, she's happily married or whatever. So fast forward to that night, Spencer and his two hunting buddies are there. I think his hunting buddies are in the tent sleeping, and he's tracking them after drinking about 3 4 cups of coffee for that evening. And that lady that he met goes outside to use the bathroom, and she gets attacked. And then the African hunters wake up and they hear two leopards instead of one, but Spencer does not know. He thinks just one leopard. So he was able to shoot the leopard, but it had already mauled and killed that lady that was using the bathroom. And then the show ends with the second leopard pouncing him. So we don't know if he survives. We don't know if he was able to fight him off. But Tristan, what was your thoughts about that whole scene in general?
Poor little white woman, man. It's just gotta a pretty little white woman. You gotta hold that in. Um, I think it's funny, like as you were kind of laying out that scene, like I'm thinking back to what you mentioned earlier about um, being in Africa and them setting up camp in this particular setting, like amongst all this wildlife and shit. Which I think is kind of like a subtle parallel to like the Yellowstone Ranch and like how it's this big land and um people, humans, mostly white people, American, like set up shop on this land as if nothing came before it, as if the land is supposed to bend
Facts.
like to their wishes and their needs and like, hey, just because y'all want to sit here and act like y'all are one with the like basically gentrifying Africa, gentrifying the fucking jungle. Um, like these threats are still there. Like like the leopard, like that tiger went tiger. Like that leopard went leopard. Like he did what it was supposed to do. Like your ass is sitting there peeing. Number one, I bet you didn't know urine attracts wild animals, sweetheart. Like what the fuck are you doing? Like so she sacrificed herself. She made herself bait. Like maybe that was part of her fancying Spencer. Like, hey, I'll be bait for you. But I just thought that it was an encapsulation of the same mistakes that people make with just nature and just thinking that nature is always going to concede to them, and that's just not how nature works. That's not how like this, the circle of life works and such. So I hate that she had to be sacrificed. Well, she sacrificed herself in order to get there, but hopefully, like, at least this is what I think. I think Spencer survives the leopard, and I think this is the impetus for him making his way back to the States and getting back to the family, which I hope happens. One of those sons, we're going to lose one of them. I hope it's not Spencer. He seems a more interesting character. So sorry, Jack.
You never know, man. Jack may pop on the scene and become a fan favorite.
I could see Spencer pulling a Ned Stark and marrying Elizabeth when something happens to Jack. Sorry,
I,
guy.
I was thinking the same thing as well. In that scene, like just the scene before, they talk about how that guy wanted to move all his people to a different part of the camp or a different part of the land. And I'm thinking, there's a threat of a leopard or other beasts in the area. Why would you not pee inside? Why would you not just pee in a cup or pee in a bucket? Like, why do you think it's a safe white person to go out there and think that, oh, nobody's gonna attack me? I'm using the bathroom. It's safe game. It's all good. Marcy, what was your thoughts on that?
Well, my thoughts is that again, like Tristan was mentioning, people that are not from an area and they're new to an area, they, if you've lived somewhere where you've typically always felt safe, in this new area you're still going to feel safe because you think like, oh, it's got to be tame, right? So I think I don't think she saw any danger. I think they definitely should have been briefed on like, do not go out at night. One, like felines are nocturnal hunters. So if they're going to be out and actively hunting, it's going to be at night. If you need to pee, like do it in your tent. But I think it's like that whole trope we see all the time where it's like something happens to a white woman and then like everybody gets up in arms and it's like, oh no, like this is not safe for white women. Now like we have to make it safe. So like now let's kill all the animals. Let's kill all the panthers and stuff because they've killed our white women. But yeah, and I also just found it very problematic that he was okay to use his two African hunter friends as bait, and then like he peed all over the tent, right? But they were smart. They're like, yeah, there's those leopards out there, those panthers out there. We're not going to go out there. Like they just stayed in their tent, holding onto their spears. Smart. So yeah, I mean, I think that was like the whole reason for that scene of like she didn't know any better because she was like, well, I'm part of this like safari, I guess, or whatever. Like, I just have to go out and pee. It's just going to be a couple minutes. Nothing's going to happen. And then like we see like what happens. So yeah, it was a very interesting way to end the episode and to kind of leave it as a cliffhanger for what happens next to Spencer.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. The social conditioning that you see throughout that scene is everything's wrong with that scene. Like, I mean, why don't the hunters have guns? Did they just have spears? Like, that's one thing I thought watching that scene. Like, he peed over this tent. He's marking his territory. Do you don't think they need firearms too? And and again, the show does a good job of trying to distract you from historical issues that this world has always dealt with. But they distract you with action and the man in shining armor, the white woman in damsel in distress. They try to distract you, but it for me it sticks out like a sore thumb of like occurring racial undertones, occurring social issues. I mean, even dating back to Tiana, like she talked about in that scene to the lady, her bedmate, that all the women that left have never written back, which you assume that they probably got killed off or, you know, or worse, tortured or whatever. So
Or they were
the
just told not to make contact with anybody there after they left.
absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. But the racial undertones and how people of non-white variety are treated in this world is it's just a solid reminder of our history. And so, I mean, I think we should end it there. But do you guys have any thoughts on the show of what you saw this past episode? I saw Tracer.
Um, yeah, just kind of piggybacking what I said at the beginning, like solid 7 out of 10. Yeah, solid 7 out of 10 pilot episode. Liked it. Looking forward. For me, really looking forward to getting more backstory from everybody. Like, I want to know more about Spencer. I want to know more about Jacob and Kara's relationship. I want to know how Spencer and Sean um, both process like their parents dying, like being there when their mother froze to death. I want to see more of John. Like, I don't. When I first watched, I confused John with Jack, and then I kind of did the math. Like, no, John actually has to be old as fuck, actually. So I didn't want to see more of John. Again, I want to know, like, how are you processing this life that you've lived over the last 4 years and such. So um, and so John should be around 45 or so. So really looking forward just to getting more backstory and seeing like the gap between 1883 and 1923. And just seeing like how the sheep herder, that conflict's gonna play out. So I just want more badass Dutton shit, man. Like, especially from Jacob. Like, come on, man. You're the great, great, great grand uncle of John Dutton the third. So I want to see some badass shit.
Absolutely, absolutely. Marcy?
I agree. I want to see more badass shit, more just cowboy shit, frontier shit. Want to see more of Spencer to see if he makes it out of Africa or if he stays in Africa, and then they kind of show us more of like how Nairobi and Kenya were also colonized by the influx of like white people, and
Yep.
like the effects that that had on those tribes and the areas there. Want to see what happens with, you know, this wedding, what happens there. So yeah, and also just kind of the other social things are going on, not only in Montana, but, you know, in the country. Like you've got Prohibition, you're gearing up for like the Dust Bowl that's going to happen in the next few years. So how is the kind of like the depredation of like all of the grassland going to like affect you in the next few years? So yeah, it's a very interesting period in like history. So I'm definitely very interested.
Absolutely, absolutely. I'm very interested as well. I really want to know more about John Dutton Sr. as well. So just to be sure, that's the current John on the show. That's his grandfather, right?
So we have John Dutton. No, Jack is his grandfather.
Jackson's grandfather.
Yeah,
Okay,
Jack is his
okay.
grandfather. So Jack and Elizabeth eventually have John Dutton the second,
Hmm.
and then John Dutton the second has John Dutton the third.
Gotcha, gotcha. Okay, that makes sense now.
Mhm.
I need to see, I need to study a family tree next time as well. But another thing that we didn't touch on as well, like the beginning of Jacob's introduction in the town center, you see a lot of women protesting, and this is on the cusp of women's suffrage during the late 19 the teens of the 1900s going to the early 1920s, and that's another major historical context as well. During that timeline, so I can't I think we'll see more of that as well. Um, Along with the issues of the depression that's coming up. I can't wait. It has the makings of be a great show, and I can't wait. So if everybody watched today, man, thank you so much for the support. I believe last time we saw, I saw that we was at 198 subscribers, so we're almost at 200. So let's keep it pushing. For those who want us to talk about any other shows that you might have an interest in that you want us to cover, please hit us up at Watcher's Basement. We're on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. We're also on Spotify, Apple Podcasts as well. Grow the audience. Hashtag Watch Your Basement. Leave a comment, like, share, subscribe. Tell your homies, all your comrades, all your brothers and sisters, everybody, please. For myself, for Tristan, for Marcy. This is Watching the Basement, episode 1 of 1923, and we will see y'all next week.